Hi guys, welcome back to the CS classroom. Today what we're going to do is learn how to make a spreadsheet in Tkinter like so. What we'll be able to do is fill in values, see them in the terminal when we click the submit button, or generate a CV that contains, basically a CV that has something that looks exactly like this. So you'll have, A, B, C, D, and you'll have rows of data. Now this is meant to mimic Microsoft Excel, and it can be used alongside other elements in your application. Let's get started. First thing I'm going to do is import, we're going to say from Tkinter, import basically all the libraries, then import the string library and CSV directly from Python. The next thing we're going to do is we are going to define what's going to be on our x-axis. So basically these x-axis labels right here. And we're going to do that by saying x-axis equals string dot ASCII dot underscore uppercase 0 to 4. And what this is basically going to do is give us the first 4 letters in the alphabet in uppercase right here. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to specify the range of our y-axis. So our y-axis is going to be 11 rows. So in order to specify that, we're going to do y-axis equals range 0 to 12. Now, this normally exists in a for loop, but we'll show how to work with this later on. So here we're specifying basically how many columns they're going to be, and here we're specifying how many rows they're going to be. We're just calling them x-axis and y-axis to make it really clear what we're referring to. Next, we're going to do cells. We're going to create a dictionary that will hold all of the data in all of the cells. This will be particularly useful when we want to print out the data in our terminal or we want to export to a CSV. Finally, we'll have main window equals TK. And this is just creating our TK instance, basically our lower level or first level window. Now we're going to call the app Spreadsheet app. Let's say title equals Spreadsheet app. Main window dot title. Now the first thing we want to do right here is we want to actually just create the labels for our rows basically on the y-axis. So what we're going to do is we're going to say for y in y-axis, which will get each number from 0 to 11. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Rather, we should do that. Label equals label main window. Text equals y, which is going to be those individual numbers. Width equals 5. And background equals white. So that label is just going to have a white background and blend into the rest of the application. That should be a string. We're also going to basically organize our entire spreadsheet using grid positioning, which basically allows us to determine the position or basically place any elements in our application based on their position in an imaginary grid. So we're going to say label.grid row equals y plus 1. So for example, that means that 0 will be in row 1 in our application, where in our application, this is really just row 0, row 1, row 2, row 3, row 4, following a grid. But we want to place the first row of our actual spreadsheet on row 1 in our application. And each one will be 1 plus whatever the spreadsheet row is. So this is actually in row 1, actually in row 2, actually in row 3 in our grid. And then that's all going to be in column 0. This being column 0, column 1, column 2, column 3, etc. So we have label, and then we're placing it in our grid according to which row the label is referring to. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to say for I x in enumerate x-axis. So really what this is doing at this point is allowing us to, so right now this is just a string. this enumerate is basically turning it into what is called an iterable, allowing us to refer to it as an array. So what we're going to do is we're going to create, and what we're going to do in this block of code is we're going to create these labels right here that will be the labels for our columns. Similar to in Excel, where we have capital letters for each column and numbers for each row. So we've got label. Actually, we could really just copy this right here. So label equals, our text is going to be X right here. And our width is going to be 35 because we want larger columns. So we're going to have a width of 35 right there for each of our, basically each of our labels. And we're going to place that on a grid as well. That's going to be label.grid, row 0, row equals 0. Remember, our first cells are in row 1 in our application, but our labels are going to be in row 0 right here. So it's going to be in row 0, and then column is going to equal I plus 1. And sticky is going to be N, which actually means north, which means that this is basically going to stick to the top of our window right here. And basically, again, enumerate creates an iterable. So we can use this kind of array, but we have the index of each one of the letters in our string. And we also have the letters themselves. So the letters themselves correspond to text, and the index of each one allows us to tell Tkinter where to place that label. That's why we use enumerate in this particular instance and not in this instance. Now what we want to do is create the actual cells themselves, which is actually not as difficult as you might think. So we're going to say for y in y-axis, we're going to create these row by row. For x core, x in enumerate, x-axis. So what we're going to do is go through each row, and we're going to create a number of cells that corresponds to the number of columns. So let me change that up. Cool. Okay. And now what we're going to do is we're going to say, we're going to give each cell, so we're going to give each one of these cells an ID. Okay. And that ID is going to be a string. And it's going to look like this. So we're going to have our X and our Y. So each cell may be like A1, A0, B3, B4. Again, similar to how it would work in an Excel spreadsheet. And now that we have that ID, which is going to help us keep track of the data in the spreadsheet, we're going to create a string variable. We're going to say string var main window. We'll have main window. It's going to be blank and then ID. This is just a string. And then we're going to create an entry. We'll say cell equals, or actually we'll say, we'll just call this, let's say entry cell. So we'll say entry main window text variable equals var. So that means that whatever value is put into each cell is going to be stored in var. And then width equals 30. Again, we're approximately matching the size of the label with the size of each individual cell, which is going to be 30 pixels in width. So width equals 30 right here. And then we're going to place this in our grid. We're going to say entry cell dot grid. Row equals y plus 1, and column equals x core plus 1. So that's systematically going to put our cells into basically an XY, basically a grid, right? So we'll start out with, for example, right here, we'll start with A0, and then B0, and then C0, and then D0, A1, B1, C1, D1, etc., with the corresponding coordinates until we're done. And here, this is actually going to look like, here, this grid is actually corresponding to our grid system in our application. So it's actually going to be like grid. This would be 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 4, etc. So this is actually positioning our cells so that they appear as a grid, or so that they appear as a spreadsheet rather. And it's doing it individually through our double for loop right here, through our nested for loop. And once we've done that, we also want to store, we're creating a dictionary called cells. So we actually already created the dictionary right up here, but for each ID, which could be A1, A2, A3, or sorry, rather A0, A1, A2, B0, B4, whatever, we're going to store the corresponding string value right here, which looks like this. So we'll just have var right there. Now, normally this wouldn't be, well, actually what we can do is we don't need to put an array. We can just call that a string right there. Okay, cool. So now that we've done that, what we want to do is we want to enable this button. Okay, so we're going to create both of these buttons and then functions that are triggered when we click those buttons. And this is so that we can show how to extract data from the spreadsheet once we've created it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just say submit button equals button root text equals submit and command equals pull data. And actually this shouldn't be window, this should be main window, right? Because we're putting this in our main window, our main Tkinter instance. We're just going to create an empty function here called pull data, which is getting the data. It's basically getting cells. It's basically getting all the data in the spreadsheet and printing it to our terminal. There's not going to be any input, and for now that's going to be blank. We're going to position this right here at the bottom, which is going to be row, I want to say row 14, column 1, or column, I believe this is actually column 2, column 1, I got column 1, column 0, column 1. Okay, so then we'll say submit button. Again, we're working in the grid positioning system. So we'll say .grid, column equals 1, row equals 14. And we're going to create another button, the generate CV button, in the following column. So I'm just going to copy this right here. I'm going to say, let's see, generate CV button. The text is going to be generate CV. That's going to be on the button. Or sorry, not CV, CSV. Command equals generate CSV. And we'll just create that blank function right here, which we're going to fill in later. That's going to help us actually generate a CSV document. And we're going to have to say, we're going to change this to generate CSV button.grid. And then we're going to change our column to 2, because this is going to be on the same row as our submit button, but just in another column. So now we've created these buttons. What we want to do is we want to actually fill in these functions right here. So in terms of pulling data, to actually get data from the spreadsheet or print it out to the terminal, it's pretty easy. Like, we already have our data in our cells dictionary, which we created right up here. So all we really need to do in this function is just say set for key value in cells of items, print key, value.get. We're using this .get because our value is going to be really the string of our object right here. And in order to get the actual data that's being input in the cell, we need to use the get function. It's a Tkinter thing. That's what we need to do. So really what we're doing is we're just taking the dictionary, we're printing out the key, which is going to be the ID of the cell. So that could be, again, A0, B3, C4, whatever, and then the value with a colon in between. So that's pretty easy. Now, what's going to be a little bit more complicated is generating our CV. So we want our CV to have a header like this. We don't really need to fill in the row numbers, because that's generally going to be either implied or just there. So we're going to start by defining our header as x-axis, which makes a lot of sense because this x-axis right here is just the letters that are the labels for our headers, right? They're what goes at the top of the spreadsheet, and which will also go at the top of the CSV. The labels for our columns, basically. Next, we're going to create an empty array called CSV data. And then we're going to take our data out of cells and put it into this array right here. And that's just so we can kind of get the values on their own. So we don't have the labels, we just have the sequential values that are in the spreadsheet. So we'll say for key value in cells.items, which is kind of repeating the code, but kind of actually the point of this is to just make it easy to read, not necessarily create the most efficient and non-repeating code. So we're going to say csv.data .append and then values or value.get. And so yeah, there what we're doing is we're just taking all of our data from our dictionary or cells dictionary and putting it in one by one to an array called CSV data. So now that we have that, we're going to say for y in y-axis, referring to the number of rows in our spreadsheet. We're going to create inner array. So part of the reason for this is that our data in our spreadsheet is going to appear as a 2D array. So basically we would have, for example, right here, we would have like, and then we'd have, you know, we'd have, let's say AF, SD, L1, L2, and then that's just going to be an example right there. I just want to give you an idea of what our array, what our array of data is going to look like in order to be placed into a CSV. So we'd have something like this. So if this was like, if we were putting, so this is basically the format we want our data from our spreadsheet to be when we put it into a CSV. This would be each row in our CSV, basically. So row 0, row 1, row 2 in our CSV, and each of these elements would be individual. And that's going to be in the form of a 2D array, okay? So just keeping that model in mind, we basically want to take the data from our spreadsheet and we want to put it in, we want to turn it into something like this. So for each of our rows, we're going to have a separate array with the data that corresponds to that row. So for A, B, C, and D. So we're going to have a 2D array with a bunch of inner arrays that are 4 elements long. So we'll have inner array equals, we're just going to make that blank. And then what we're going to have is we're going to have 4x in x-axis, referring to our columns, or the number of columns. Inner array dot append CSV data counter. So basically, this loop, because we really only have 4 elements in x-axis, or 4 values, it's going to, actually I need to define counter right up here. Okay, I'm going to define a variable called counter equals 0, and main array right here. I'll get to this in a second. But so what we're going to do is we're going to create a series of 4 inner arrays of 4 values each, corresponding to, okay, first 4 values, second 4 values, third 4 values, fourth 4 values, and so on. And we're going to say counter plus equals 1. So that means that we're going to go through our CSV data array. Our CSV data array contains all the values that were put into the spreadsheet. And we're going to go through a 4 by 4. So we're going to first get CSV data 0, put that into inner array, then 1, then put that into inner array, then 2, then put that into inner array, and then 3, and then put that into inner array. Okay, and that's going to be the end of one iteration in x-axis, which also corresponds to 1 row. And then once we do that, we're going to add that inner array to our main array. And our main array is what's really going to be put into our CSV and is what's going to look like this. So we're going to have main array dot append inner array. And once we do that, we're going to go back right here. So that takes care of row 1 or row 0. And then now we're going to row 1. Inner array is going to be blank, but our counter is 4. So now we're going to go to 5, put that into our inner array, 6, 7, 8, put that into our inner array, add that to our main array, which would be the second row, and then start the process all over again. So basically we're going through our array right here with all of our data, 4 by 4, so 4 values at a time, putting them into an array, adding that to our main array, which is our 2D array, and then moving on and then creating another array of 4 elements and then adding that to our main array until we've gone through 4 by 4 all of the elements in our spreadsheet. Now that we've done that, we're going to go ahead to actually adding our data to our CSV. We're going to say file equals open. We're going to create a file called data.csv. We're going to do W for write. Our encoding is going to be UTF-8. And I'm going to say new line equals that. We're going to create a writing object. I'm going to say writer equals csv.writer file. And then we're going to write our header. So our header is just going to be x-axis. It's just going to be ABCD. So we're going to say the first row is going to be writer.write row. Notice this is a row without an S, so it's just going to write one row. And then our next line is going to be writer.write rows. And this is where we're actually going to write the 2D array, the 2D main array that we've created that will look like this. So we're going to say write rows with an S. And then we're going to put in main array, which we've created right here. And then we're going to do file.close, because by that point in time, we have finished writing to the file and we can close it out. So that is basically how you create a spreadsheet. What we want to do now is we want to test it out and troubleshoot, which is an important part of every tutorial because that tells you what to watch out for. And it also prevents me from giving you any erroneous information. One last thing we want to do before we test it out is do main window.main loop, or main underscore window.main loop, because otherwise our application simply won't run. So now that we've done that, what I want to do is, it's kind of weird having the header there. Okay, we've got that. We're going to go ahead and we're going to, oh, okay. Right here, we already have an error, line 15. Label, name label is not defined. Let's go to line 15. Okay, this needs to be capitalized right there. And so does this, actually. Okay, cool. Got that out of the way. Okay, next, let's go ahead and see if that runs. Okay, cool. So everything visually looks all right. I'm going to type some data in here and see what happens when I click submit. That's going to be a clue. Okay, and it looks good. Most of it's blank, but like, okay, B5 is ASD. So B5 right here is ASD. B3 is SAD. Again, B3 is SAD. So generally it looks like we can see data that corresponds to the appropriate label. So now what I want to do, I'm just going to fill in just a bit more data and see if I can generate a CSV. So I've got a CSV called data.csv. And again, that name comes from right here. I basically said I wanted my CSV to be called data.csv. Let's open it up. And it looks like everything looks good. So for example, this is our header. We have our first value for sad, and then we have a bunch of blank values in that particular row. This doesn't look very pretty here in code, but if you open it up in Excel, then it's going to look perfectly formatted. So that's how you create a spreadsheet in Tkinter. If you'd like to see more tutorials like this, please remember to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Also leave a comment of any videos you would like me to make in the future. I'm always looking for new ideas. Otherwise, other than that, have a nice day.